Some say he's a technical whiz. Some say he was born in Cornwall. While some say he's on a journey. It's The Journey. And here's your host, David Hackett.
Hi everyone, welcome to another journey, and this journey is taking us to a mystic, author, teacher, and former founder and CEO of a multi-million-dollar consumer products company. He shares intimate and personal stories and teaches workshops on leadership, healing, transformation, awakening, love, synchronicity, and wisdom that unites and expands the human experience. He now lives in Redmond, Washington, and he is John David, and I hope I get this right, Latta.
You nailed it. Perfect, David.
Welcome to the journey.
Thank you very much, David. I appreciate the invitation to be here.
No worries. And as I said before we started recording, it's not about my journey, because my journey is long, expanding, and I could talk about my experiences all day long, but this is about your journey. So, and I will chip in if need be. So,
okay.
Where did your journey begin?
Well, the journey that I chronicled in my book, The Synchronicity of Love, began about 20 years ago when everything that could go wrong all went wrong at the same time in my life. Began a period of long transformation. So I was married with 2 children, and my wife got cancer. It came completely out of left field, and she was healthy, took good care of herself, and we were really surprised to find out she had cancer. And very quickly, they took out her entire thyroid gland, and including a bunch of lymph nodes. And she began to change after that. She started reading books about God and the meaning of life, and started reevaluating her own life, and went very quiet, very inward. And I don't think I was a good person at that stage of my life to support her, because I had a sort of rigid, rational view of life. I didn't pray. I didn't go to church. I wasn't a spiritual person in any way. So I didn't know how to support her through all that. In the middle of it all, I had left my very secure job and started my own company. And in a short period of time, had lost all of our money, including to the tune of $650,000. We were in debt, $250,000 in personal credit card debt, borrowed against the house, borrowed money from the banks. And there wasn't any sign I was going to get out of that debt. And every day we were one hair's breadth away from going bankrupt. And then in the middle of it all, also, I don't know why I suddenly had this terrible fear of death. And I, again, having not really been to church other than when I was really young, and not considering myself a spiritual person in any way, I didn't know what to make of death. All I could envision was, when the body dies, that's it. It's over. And I couldn't wrap my mind around what felt like oblivion or forever. And it was terrifying to me. And then in the middle of all that, my wife decides she wants a whole new life and leaves, and says, "You take the kids, you're the better parent. See you later. Goodbye." And so now I've got 2 kids, ages 9 and 11, custody of them, a company that's every day, one day away from bankruptcy. And I'm in unbelievable fear and anxiety about how the heck we're going to start all over from zero. And then running around behind closed doors, terrified of death and afraid to talk to anybody about it. And so weirdly, that began my journey. And then I had been a fan of Michael Crichton, the author, who had written a bunch of best-selling books. And a lot of people don't know he wrote an autobiography called Travels, a nonfiction book. And he also went through a difficult period of time in his life. And he, like me, highly rational, highly logical, didn't believe in spirituality or religion. But he went through a shift where he decided to explore all the things that he didn't truly know anything about. He wanted to go experience it for himself. And he went to a spiritual retreat. And I loved reading his story about his experiences there. And so having felt like I was suddenly a bad husband, a bad dad, a bad businessman, and a grown man terrified of death, I signed up for the same spiritual retreat Michael Crichton went to 20 years earlier. I couldn't believe the guy was still teaching almost the identical same retreat. And when I got there, almost immediately after I signed up, a lot of strange synchronicity started to happen in my life, a lot of little miracles, a lot of little coincidences. And it began with, I was very nervous about going because it was like a Nazi skinhead deciding he was going to move in with his black neighbors across the street. It was that difficult for me to go to this retreat. And I was really afraid the teacher was going to be some crazy guru guy or something. But as the plane is touching down, I look over and the woman next to me is reading his book. And I'm like, are you going to the same spiritual retreat that I am? Yeah, I am. I'm really nervous. Are you going? Yeah, I am. I'm nervous too. Well, you look normal. Well, you look normal too. Okay, well, maybe this is going to be okay. And 180 people on the plane, the only two people going to this retreat, me and her. What are the chances we get seated side by side? What are the chances at the moment that plane is touching down, she's reading his book? Because I never would have talked to her otherwise. And so that began my journey. And just jump in here, David, if you have questions along the way. But everything began to change then. I also started a therapy process, and the therapist put me in with a group. I'd never been to a therapy process before, counseling. I'd never been in a group before. And in the blink of an eye, for the most part, I was the only man with 10 women and 2 women therapists. And I felt like a man alone in therapy. Well, you laugh, but it's true. It was, in some ways, it was terrifying to me. And
so you was the outcast of the group compared.
I very much felt that way. Yeah. And about that same time, the teacher I went to the retreat asked us to start paying attention to our dreams and recording our dreams. And I started to have a lot of different kinds of dreams. At first, they didn't make sense because the dreams were almost always speaking to me through symbols, and I didn't really understand how to read the language of my dreams. But just to show you an example of how the dreams were coming through, right about the time I was starting that group therapy, I had a dream where all the women in my group were gathered together and they're talking, and they said, you know, we're going to get together and peel shrimp, but we're worried about John. And in the dream, I say, well, why is that a problem? I love shrimp. And they said, well, you know, peeling shrimp can be kind of painful and kind of messy. And so the analogy there that made sense later was being in therapy is like being a shrimp having your shell peeled off. And it was difficult for me. And so so I started having a lot of dreams, and they started to become very informative and very helpful. And then about 2 years after that spiritual retreat, I had the opportunity, because I had my company, and it was, while the sales were good, the losses were horrible, but I was able to stop the bleeding. And for about 2 years, every day had just enough to stay in business, just enough to keep my head above water.
So you had that amount, like 5%, 10%, just to keep afloat.
Yeah. It didn't get better, but it didn't get worse either. And it was just enough to get by. Well, so I had a consumer products company, and I had the opportunity to appear on QVC, the home shopping network, which I'd never done before. And I was excited, but I was also nervous because they said they get 700,000 new viewers every minute. And so I'd never been on live TV before. So I go on, and I sold a fair amount of product. It wasn't great, but it wasn't horrible. And went back to my hotel room in Philadelphia, and I couldn't sleep that night. I felt all this joy in my body. And maybe about midnight, I had the strangest experience. I had what felt like this giant orgasm in my perineum area, my root chakra, they call it. And this beautiful energy just filled my whole body. I'm like, what the hell was that? And every few minutes, it would happen again and again and again. And half of me was terrified, like, what the hell is going on? But the other part of me is like, well, I don't know what this is, but it feels better than any drug. Like, this is amazing. And so it went on for a few hours. I had no idea what was happening to me. I think I slept for all of 2 hours that night, had to hop a plane home the next morning for Seattle. And on my way home, I asked some people, like, what is, that might know, like, what do you think is happening? And they said, well, it sounds like Kundalini energy. You should look it up. So I looked it up and I went, oh yeah, that does kind of sound like what's happening to me. And what started to happen from that day forward is about every second or third day, what I would call the energy would show up at nighttime. And I learned that this Kundalini energy goes by many names in many cultures throughout time. And I think Christians just call it the movement of the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
But it's felt like energy in the body. It feels like there's a lot of things going on that don't have anything to do with health or, physical health or anything like that. There's something going on and it's beyond my volitional control. And every second or third night, I would have this beautiful energy and these amazing visions. Like I couldn't wait for the energy to come, but it would come all night long if I let it. Sometimes I had to tell it to go away because I was tired. I just sleep. I'm, still running this business that's hanging by a thread. I've got, custody of my 2 kids. I need my sleep. And so it would disappear for a night or two. And then when I'd feel rested and better, it would come back again. And this went on for months and months. It actually went on for years, but it was probably most intense the first 6 months. And what I learned about Kundalini energy, usually it's described as feminine energy, goddess energy, earth energy, sexual energy, primal energy. And its goal is to rise up and purify the body, purify what they call the chakras in the individual. And my experience of it was that the energy was intense. It was painful. It was sometimes beautiful and blissful. My dreams were full of women and goddesses. And so without knowing it at the time, I think up to that point in my life, I lived a very one-sided life, a sort of competitive, hardworking, rational guy. And an entire other side of me that I would call my feminine side and or my spiritual side was awakening in me. But I didn't know it at the time. It just was always shocking and unbelievable what it felt like was happening. And so it sounds sort of cliche. My wife and I joke that my book could have been called Rigid Rational Male Transforms into Random Accidental Mystic. But that's exactly what happened. You might say hyper competitive male turned into more loving, better listening, better compassionate, more compassionate.
So it reawakened you for the better. It turned your personality, would you say, for the better?
It absolutely did. Absolutely better. And I think the best way I could describe it is wholeness. I was very one-sided. I just didn't know it. And now I'm much more balanced. I'm much more whole. But I didn't know I was going through that at the time. And I definitely would describe it as better because, in every situation in life, sometimes there's a time to do something and there's sometimes you just let it go. There's a time to speak and a time to listen. And I had been good at one, but not the other. And so that was the transformation. That was the journey that was taking place in me, is into wholeness, which scared me in a lot of ways. But looking back, it actually makes you more resourceful in every single situation. There's like, okay, I know what I can do in this situation. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. So it's less thinking quickly and taking your time in thinking, I assume. So as I always describe it, you don't just jump in, you learn to take it step by step now, instead of just thinking, here's a diving board, I'm jumping straight in. You're taking your time diving in.
Right. That's exactly right. And I think I have a story in my book about tucking my kids in bed. And so, my experience had been in management. I'd been managing people ever since I was 18 years of age. And it was sort of almost military-like, and I was really good at planning and strategy and getting things done on time. And so one night I'm tucking my kids in bed and my son is happily babbling away about his day. And I want him to be quiet so I can turn off his light because I have things to do, right? And I remember all the women in my group therapy saying, John, you're so good at doing. You should try being. I'm like, what is being? I have no idea what that even means. So I just sat there. I said, well, maybe it means like just listening. So I just sat there and just really listened closely to my son talking about his day. And then, David, I was suddenly overwhelmed with this incredible feeling of love like I'd never felt in my life before. And so it taught me to slow down. It taught me to just be. It taught me to listen. And I definitely went back to that group therapy going, wow, maybe these women know something that I don't know.
Well, they always do say, and I'm not being in any way derogative when I say this, women always know what's best.
Don't tell my wife that.
They rule the roost. They like to be in control, and they just like us to bring the money in, as I always would say.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
so taking your time and understanding what was being presented to you, did that make it more challenging for you, or did it make it more easier for you?
Well, I think it was very challenging every step of the way because I didn't really know what was happening to me. It's only now looking backwards that I can say, oh, okay, now I can see what was going on.
So reflection, you reflect back and
exactly.
you can say,
Yeah. Yeah, there's a beautiful speech that Steve Jobs from Apple did, the commencement speech at Stanford. You can look it up online.
yeah,
And I
and
think
I
it
have
was like,
that. That's an amazing speech. One, I like
yeah,
Steve Jobs, and I remember that one. It's like, wow.
yeah. Well, you remember in that commencement speech, he talked about taking a class in calligraphy. And then who the heck ever thought calligraphy could help him in the business world? He just did it because he liked the artistry of it. But later, when they were developing the Apple Macintosh computer, he thought, well, let's try giving people a choice of many different fonts to choose from when they're writing. And that was the one thing that put the Apple on the map that made it better and different from the PC, all from that calligraphy class. And
Yeah,
so I do like to tell people, it's sort of cliche to follow your desires, to follow your bliss, go where it feels like you need to go and your deepest desires want to take you, because you never know later how that very thing you decided to do is incredibly beneficial later in life. And
yeah.
that's exactly what Steve Jobs was trying to preach in that commencement speech.
And he did it so well. And like I said, I've watched it several times on YouTube,
Yeah.
and it's just, the poignant part of, you hear of his keynotes when he used to do presentations, but this defines Steve Jobs as a whole, which made him strong, so people understood him, if that makes sense. It
Yeah.
was like the defining moment to say, this is me. You heard about him saying, about his products, but that's not him. Yes, it was his brain thinking, but it wasn't him for him. It wasn't a war Steve Jobs. It wasn't the Steve Jobs people wanted to hear. They wanted to know. And this was the way to inspire people. And it still does, I believe, inspires people for now.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree. I think, I always want to encourage people to pay attention to their desires and to pay attention to their intuition. And I think that's a hard thing for people to do nowadays, intuition, because it requires sometimes being a little bit quiet. And the world is so noisy in so many ways. There's so many ways to distract yourself. I was just talking to a woman yesterday. She was telling me, I just thought it was the best story. She goes, I live in Vancouver, British Columbia, and I went up to a cabin in Penticton. And in the freezer there was some frozen dog food. And as I was getting ready to leave the cabin, I was going from there to go visit a friend of mine in another cabin. My intuitive voice said, take the dog food with you. And she's like, what? Okay. So she took the frozen dog food with her, drove to another cabin, met her friend. Her friend arrived with her dog, and she was so happy to be there, but so distraught because she forgot her dog food. And so it didn't make any sense at the time, why this first woman should bring the dog food with her, but it made perfect sense when she caught up with her friend who forgot to bring the dog.
Yeah.
So yeah, I try to tell people all the time, pay attention to your desires, pay attention to your intuition.
So where do you see, you spoke about your past, and now we're talking about the present. How do you see things are presently in the current, well, overcoming the current pandemic that happened? How do you see things progressing for yourself now?
Well, that's been interesting. So I got really lucky. I owned a fairly large company, and I probably back in 2017, I could feel this little nagging voice inside me that said, I'm done with my company. I was bored. I didn't want to do it anymore. There was a lot of logistical issues. I just didn't have the same zest or enthusiasm for it anymore. So I prepared the company for sale and sold the company in 2019, 3 months before the pandemic hit. And boy, talk about a few times I just want to get down and kiss the ground a few times because, there was a lot of logistical issues and headaches afterwards with supply chain issues. And the owner who bought my company said that they had been in business for 65 years, and the last 2 or 3 years has been the most difficult in their entire company history. So I've been in sort of semi-retirement, you might say, for the last 2 or 3 years. And so, and I'm in the Seattle area, which more than a lot of areas was almost on, I would call, extreme lockdown. And a lot of people have been very reluctant to get out, even now with the vaccines, get back out in public again.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to say, I think next year, things are going to start returning to normal. I thought it was going to be this year, but I still have friends that are still reluctant to get out. They're cautious. And so it's been a very quiet time. I'm not sure if I'm answering your question.
No,
but
you are. So
yeah,
would you
for me,
say
it's still been.
so would you say 2022, even though you wanted to move on, would you still say it's a period of reflection?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think 2020 and 2021 were a period of reflection. I thought 2022, everybody's going to get back to normal again. I think that might be next year. So 2022 was probably still a year of reflection. And a lot of people, like I said, that I know are like, I'm just going to stay home, not going to mix with the public. So
Because obviously the pandemic hit us, and 2 years, people were obviously following guidelines which was provided, but it's understandable. And obviously now 22 is nearly at the end. You would say people are getting back into the idea and getting used to the idea of going. So is that reflection of understanding that they want to say, okay, I've took my time, I've understood what's happened, this has happened, now to move on. So
yeah.
I would assume it's about that initial 2-year period where it was everyone was afraid. Time for yourself for the third year. By the time, next year is the third year, but the end of the year into the third year, you can say moving on. We've had it, and then talk about what's to come.
Yeah, and I think the curious thing will be to find out how many people do return back to normal. Some people, a lot more people working from home today. Maybe that never changes. A lot more people had time to reflect, quiet time. Maybe that doesn't change either. Maybe people decide they like that. So it's hard to really know where we're going to go in the next year or two. And I want to acknowledge that some people during the pandemic, especially if you were in retail, you probably worked long hours and there probably wasn't a lot of time for reflection. There's a lot of businesses out there that are running just a little short on help. And the ones that are working, boy, if you were in healthcare, you probably didn't have any time to rest, to reflect. Those people were working, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So it was definitely a huge, turbulent period of time the last few years. And so I think we'll have to just wait and see what comes of it. I want to say the healthcare workers hopefully get a break and everybody else gets to decide if they want to jump back into the craziness or not.
Yeah, I understand that totally. So we're now slipping into the future. So I will discuss the future.
Yeah.
We like to know that there is good times coming, both spiritually, emotionally, whichever way you want to label it. But do you think the good times are definitely coming back? Or do you think there will be that, like we were saying previous, do you think the uncertainty will still be there?
Okay, so here's my very expert prediction, David. I see the world getting better and worse at the same time. And so I think a lot of things are going to get better. A lot of things, are going to improve. And I think if you look behind the scenes, it doesn't really make headlines. There's so many things in the world that are getting better. We just don't realize it. We don't see it in the headlines because it doesn't make news. And so I think behind the scenes, I think a lot of the world is getting to be better. But front and center in the news, oh my gosh, there's still so much tension around politics and so much discord there. And I don't think that that's going to change overnight. So there's my answer is I think some things are going to get worse and I think some things are going to get better.
Yeah, and I do understand that things will be difficult because wherever you live, there is political discord wherever you look. And I hope it gets better because I got to give a very neutral answer in this, but I just hope it's a way forward that everyone will come to an agreement and say, okay, this is what we want, and everyone's happy. But I honestly can't. But I honestly, in my own opinion, I can't see it happening anytime soon.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Growing up, I saw there was political discord. I saw there's a lot of unrest, and I'm not just counting that. I've been watching the media. I've been part of the media. So it's about will there, won't there? And I honestly don't think there will be a happy medium at all. And it's a shame.
Unless what?
And I say it's a big shame that no one could come to the happy medium.
Yeah.
Because that's what, hindsight, you could say, yeah, we could do it. But this in hindsight, this is what personal opinions are, and you've just got to keep it as a personal opinion, because if, you or me is just one little percentage, we're not the bigger picture.
Yeah.
And that's what I think damages, because if we was given a choice to voice our opinion, maybe something could be done.
Yeah.
But sadly, as you know, we can't. So to this question I always ask people, what would you want to see from the future, apart from political stability, happiness, everything to be as we would want it to be, right? Rosie, how would you want it to be for the future for you?
Well, I think what I'm excited about and what I like to share and teach to others and what I would like other people to embrace is to always allow yourself to grow and change. I mean, that is the journey. And I think it's easy to get stuck in how you see things and how you perceive things. And I always want to encourage people. There's a saying I love, sometimes you don't know what you don't know. And so what I would like to see in the future is a bit more open-mindedness, a bit more open heart, a bit more willing to say, okay, I see things this way, but I'm willing to see it another way, or at least consider another way. And I think the whole world grows that way. I think the whole world becomes more compassionate towards each other that way. I like to describe, sometimes it feels like we build brick walls around ourselves. And then we built almost a prison around ourselves where we think we know everything. And I want to encourage people, it's okay to start taking apart those brick walls. And that's where I would like to see myself go. That's where I'd like to see the world go. Just because we've always done things the same way doesn't mean we can't change and do them differently.
Okay. And so if people want to find out more about you, I've given your little bio, but you said about book and your books. Is there any way people can find out more about you?
Yeah. So my website is John David Latta. My last name is spelled Latta, johndavidlatta.com. And my book is called The Synchronicity of Love, Stories That Heal, Transform, and Awaken. It's available on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and I just found out yesterday, Target and Walmart as well.
Okay. Anything else you would want to say to people before we conclude this interview?
I think I'd add on to what I said before. I like to tell the story of if you were 3 years old and attacked by a big black dog, you might go through the rest of your life terrified of big black dogs and think that all big black dogs are evil and that they bite and that they're mean. And this is what I'm talking about. It's okay as we mature later in life to sort of question those beliefs and look around and go, it might have just been one big black dog that was mean. The one I bumped into when I was 3 years old, they're not all big and mean. There might be a few. And so again, begin that process of, I would call it questioning your thoughts, questioning your beliefs, question your identity, and allow that identity and your belief system to grow and change and evolve.
John, it's been a pleasure talking to you, and thank you for sharing your journey with us today.
Thank you so much, David. I appreciate the invitation.
That was The Journey, hosted by Wise Words Imaging, hosted by David Hackett. Be sure to like, subscribe and listen to another journey coming soon.